Hi, Philip, not from Digital Foundry here. Quake 2 has been available with ray tracing for a few months now, but yesterday Nvidia released their own version, with numerous optimizations and new features thrown in. The only downside is that you need a Geforce 2000 series to run it. I'm using a Geforce 2080 Ti. You can get Quake 2 RTX on Steam. Ray tracing, also path tracing, they're the holy grail of computer graphics. Throw enough power at it, and in return it will give you perfect lighting and reflections. Two things that are notoriously difficult to do in computer graphics. But we're talking about a lot of power here. I didn't expect it to be a thing for at least several more years, but it's arrived a bit sooner than expected, thanks to a clever denoiser that can turn this into this. And I can't help but be impressed with what it can achieve with such a limited amount of information to go off of. Even in bright scenes, the noise is a horrible mess, but in dark areas such as this one, I don't even know how it's able to piece together a coherent image. That poor denoiser is working overtime to interpret a room from like 3 dots of light. If you stand completely still, you can sometimes make out slight shimmering around the edges of objects, and it takes a moment or so for your shadow to fade into its proper position. These are all a result of limited rays being cast. I hope for optimizations as time goes on, but ultimately, we'll probably have to wait for more powerful hardware to reduce this effect further. But even in its current state, it's certainly not enough to be a nuisance. The Geforce 2000 series is the first to have a bit of it dedicated to being able to do this. It's not like you can't do it on AMD or older Nvidia cards, it's just that it would be docked slow. So, here in Quake 2, I'll show you some of the bits that I like the most. In case you're wondering why the baddies aren't shooting at me, it's because I've disabled AI. I'm effectively invisible to them, allowing me to study them in their natural habitat. Bastard. I love this translucent glassy material that lets you see your reflection a bit. Staring at an ugly marine and a broken glass window might seem like a waste of £1,000, but for anybody with experience of how wrong or botched reflections have been in games up until now, this is kind of a big thing. And there's an even better place to go if you want to stare at yourself. A few rooms on is this data server thing, and it reflects things better still. And I think it's the best example of the reflections that ray tracing can pull off. Look at that bad guy walking about in the background. Just ignore how your camera view seems to be coming from the marine's crotch. And they've added reflections to the BFG because why not? Oh, and of course there's the water as well. I guess this isn't quite as impressive to me, since water is one of the things that games have already gotten quite good at imitating, since back in like 2004 with games such as Far Cry and Half-Life 2, and then more recently with screen space reflections. But it's still nice to see it done properly, and to know that it can handle whatever it needs to reflect without being limited to tricks or what's visible on screen at the time. Although reflections are normally what's used to showcase ray tracing, I find it often feels forced because most things in real life aren't reflective enough to warrant it. Simple cube maps or screen space reflections are usually enough to suffice. I expect the first games with ray tracing to be way too reflective in order to justify the effect, with every window and metallic surface polished to perfection, and every person's face coated in thick grease, and for explosions to be shown in close-ups of eyeballs and so on. I personally prefer what ray tracing means for lighting. Again, it's something that games have gotten good at faking, but there are still some simple things, like when there are 2 shadows cast from the same object, when a light source is big, or when you being stood in a light source makes the whole scene darker, that we haven't seen properly until now. This will be something that future generations will take for granted, and I pity them, for they won't know how awesome it is to run into a room and to think, I wonder if it will get dark if I stand in front of that light over there. And then to get excited about it when it does, as though you thinking that up is like you solving some elaborate puzzle or something. Somewhat strangely, it's made me appreciate it more in real life as well, and I found myself doing all sorts of weird stuff today as a result of this demo. The flare gun was an excellent idea, and I enjoyed throwing several of them about to cast diffused shadows and dancing lights, and I found it surprisingly hard to cast dark shadows. It turns out your average video game room is lit by dozens of different light sources. I messed about with the mundane in Quake 2 for far too long, as I used to with new graphics technologies. It reminded me of when I played Devastation, the first game I remember with physics on barrels, and how long I spent knocking them about the level. As cool as it is ray tracing worth it? For a tech demo like this, absolutely. For anybody interested in seeing what ray tracing, or path tracing, can do, yes. However, I haven't seen it used in any proper games that warrants the performance impact. The truth is, today's games are extremely good at faking lighting and reflections without requiring full-blown ray tracing. And for 99% of the time, I think more FPS benefits it more than accurate reflections in a nearby puddle do. I like the idea of it being handled by a separate part of the graphics card. I almost feel like I might as well enable it, since it's not stealing resources from the rest of the card and is instead doing something detached and separate. It still equates to lower FPS though, I guess because even with dedicated hardware, the effect still slows that bit down and makes it the bottleneck. I guess we'll have to wait for AMD's DXR optimized cards before we can tell how good Nvidia's implementation of it is. But I do see real-time ray tracing having its uses in games, especially those that are dynamically changing. Fallout 76 would be a good example of this. Thanks to its crappy engine, indoor areas look flat and poorly lit. The interiors of Fallout 76 would benefit from ray tracing of some kind, especially when they're continually being built up and changed by the player in real time. But I think Minecraft is the best game for it. It's bright, colourful and simple, so the effect would be easy to see. And it's also a world full of stuff that can change and move, with miles of dark caves, hundreds of torchlights and pools of lava. Yeah, that's currently the worst case scenario for traditional rendering techniques to light. Having seen Digital Foundry's ray-traced video of Minecraft, I can say it looks incredible. Having had a 4K screen for years, the biggest benefit of using a high resolution isn't in games, but in Microsoft Word. Text looks so crisp and clean in 4K. And likewise, I think the main benefit of ray tracing isn't in complex looking games, but in simpler titles like Minecraft, where there's less to disguise the effect. Textures almost get in the way of it. Disabling them in Quake 2 shows the changing lighting far more clearly. You can really make out the fainter shadows cast by the dimmer light sources, and how a simple bullet can change the lighting throughout the entire room. I am using the Geforce 2080 Ti. What sort of performance am I getting? This is some footage of 1080p, 1440p, and this is 4K, which I wouldn't recommend. In fact, while I could play at 1440p, I'd rather stick to 1080p and get buttery smooth performance. I already know from comments I've seen on other videos what a lot of you are thinking. You're thinking it's unacceptable for a £1,000 2080 Ti to only get smooth performance at 1080p. But you're missing the point here. It's not about the resolution. We're talking about ray tracing, something we shouldn't even be able to have yet. Just a year ago, I wouldn't have believed we'd soon have graphics cards capable of this level of ray tracing performance and quality, let alone at proper resolutions like 1080p. The fact that gaming with ray tracing at 1440p is even a viable option is crazy to think about. I feel that criticising performance shows that you don't understand what it is that you're seeing, and this Quake 2 demonstration is a wonderful thing, clearly developed by people with a real passion for graphics technology. I like to think that it's a pet project for a few enthusiastic people over at Nvidia. I may not always agree with their pricing and branding, but I do appreciate that they've taken the initiative here and have made ray tracing playable. I mean, yeah, it's based on DXR, which anybody can use. They've simply gone and called their implementation of it RTX to try and get ray tracing only associated with their graphics cards. As much as I like AMD, I don't see them creating hardware optimized for it or tech demos to showcase this. You could argue that it's pointless to support it so early on, but I don't see that as a reason to criticize Nvidia for doing so. It's obviously early days for this. The technology will be restricted to tech demos and optional graphics options for a number of years. Nvidia themselves are still selling new graphics cards without support for this kind of tech. But even in this early state, ray tracing is already impressive, and can only get better. Like I said, to achieve such impressive results in real time from such a noisy image is an incredible feat, and as hardware gets more powerful, it's only going to get better and clearer. If you want to know, I wasn't going to get a Geforce 2080 Ti. Late one night when browsing the internet, I saw one from a major retailer for a considerable discount. It sounded too good to be true, but I thought I had nothing to lose from taking a chance on it. Sure enough, it was an open box card that refused to work, so I returned it and got my money back. Turns out, I did have something to lose from this, because the excitement of receiving and installing it, followed by the disappointment of it not working, made me rebound and buy it full price from another retailer because I felt I was so close to having had it. And at least now I have a 3-year warranty should anything go wrong. I'll get my money's worth. You want some speculation? I'm going to do some now, even though you might hate me for it and the future might prove me wrong. Here we go. Normally, lack of competition means that progress slows down, but I think this is an odd situation where AMD being uncompetitive made Nvidia launch this technology sooner than they would have otherwise. Bear with me here. This RTX stuff takes up a lot of the graphics card. The 2080 Ti is only 30% faster than the 1080 Ti, despite being 60% bigger and being 12nm instead of 16. I think this could have been a problem for Nvidia. Since AMD's cards don't have a bit dedicated to RTX, AMD kind of have an advantage in that they have more space on their cards to make them faster than Nvidia's in normal games. So the question for Nvidia was, how could they launch a flagship card with RTX without letting AMD steal the performance crown in the meantime? Since I'm free to speculate here, had AMD's Vega been faster than the 1080 Ti, I think that Nvidia's 2000 series would simply have been a faster version of the 1000 cards in order to reclaim the performance crown. They wouldn't have bothered with RTX, they'd just have focused on producing the fastest cards possible. I think the 1650 and 1660 cards are remnants of that plan. I reckon Nvidia initially had even faster cards like the 1670, 1680 and 1680 Ti, and these were originally going to be branded the 2000 series. And in this original plan, I think RTX was reserved for the jump to 7nm, which would have allowed them to produce the cards at cheaper and smaller die sizes. But as it was, AMD not being competitive in the high end meant that Nvidia could launch them at 12nm, at prices high enough to warrant their massive size and cost to produce, knowing that if anybody wanted RTX or flagship performance, they'd have no choice but to pay top dollar for it. In a way, the transition to RTX was the most vulnerable Nvidia had been in a long time, but they got away with it because AMD is weak. And now they've made the jump, unless Navi is a bigger hit than anybody's expecting, Nvidia is only going to get stronger. Because now it's here, AMD's in serious trouble. It doesn't matter if ray tracing effects are limited for now, they're still something. In the past, AMD have struggled enough to sell cards, even when at the same performance and price as Nvidia's. But while this used to just be down to mindshare and poorer efficiency, RTX now brings about a real reason to prefer an otherwise equal Nvidia card at a particular price point. AMD will have their work cut out to make their cards appealing without resorting to discounted prices. If you must know, all this is why I bought the 2080 Ti. I don't see anything to rival it coming out from AMD anytime soon, so don't expect the price point for this level of performance to drop that much in the foreseeable future. What will change is the price of any card that AMD's Navi series competes with. I fully expect a price war further down, with the Geforce 2060 and 2070 getting TI editions, Super editions, or whatever else Nvidia chooses to do to ruin Navi's launch and to prevent AMD from reclaiming any market share. But as far as the 2080 Ti is concerned, I think we'll have to wait for AMD's next gen cards before we see competition at this performance level, by which time I'll have gotten my money's worth out of whatever price premium I've had to pay for the privilege, as well as a sneak peek at ray tracing as a bonus extra. Looking back at past generations, it's not like the owners of the 980 Ti or 1080 Ti have regretted their purchases. But yeah, had I not taken a chance on an open box 2080 Ti, I'd probably have stuck to my 1080 until AMD's next gen series came out, as I think waiting until the first generation of proper 7nm cards is about as future-proof as you can get. I am not normally a gambling man, but with this graphics card purchase, I believe I am. It will be interesting to see if I've made a big mistake. Only time will tell. Apologies to anybody expecting the Odgrub video. A bit like Destruction Diarist 2, it's finished and could be released now, but it seems a shame for so much effort to go to waste because I didn't invest that little bit of extra time into making it as good as it could have been. As it stands, the first half of the video was perfect, but the second suffers from pacing issues and I found a way of making the storyline simpler and more coherent, so I'm in the process of redoing that. It won't be long. And to tide you over for now, here's a new clip. No ray tracing. So angry.